continue that. Apologies. So let's continue here our discussion. Apologies for all those who were muted until now. That wasn't intentional. That was just, maybe this is a way to make you feel bad for not being here in person. All right, we're going to explore two texts. This is where I feel bad that you don't have the photocopies of this yet, but I will tell you the ideas. I'll read these texts to you, and then we'll discuss them, okay? All right, and I want you to pay attention as I read these texts to you, because and to try then to explore and discuss what they teach us about the soul and life and death, okay? And what attitudes does this reveal about the soul's relationship with corporeality, with our physical world that we live in? Perhaps any ideas that you weren't aware of that you will pick up when I read these texts, and then we'll discuss this. Okay, let's look at this. The first text is from the Medrash. It's on a parsha that we read a few weeks ago, and the Medrash says as follows: Miyad Romez Hakadosh Baruch Hu Lamalach Hamamuna. Maybe I should just read it to you for now, just in English, and then we'll perhaps when you have your copies, you'll read it in Hebrew as well if you wish. It says as follows: 40 days before the conception of a child, God summons the angel in charge of souls and tells him, "Bring before me a certain soul that is now in paradise. Its name is such and such, and its appearance is such and such." So now the angel knows which soul we're talking about. Maybe this is an ID number. This is possible, says the Medrash, because all souls that are born in this world were created on the day the world was created, and exist until the end of time. So the first point the Medrash is telling us that every soul was created at the very beginning of time, on the sixth day of creation, and all these souls will exist for eternity until the end of time. Continuing back inside the text now. The angel goes and brings the soul before God. The soul bows and prostrates itself before the Supreme King of Kings. Again, this might be anthropomorphically speaking. Familiar with the term anthropomorphically? It's a Latin word that means not literally per se. That is applying human language to spiritual matters. God instructs the soul, "Please enter the seminal drop that is currently in the hands of the angel in charge of pregnancy." Okay, very interesting. These words of the Medrash. Please enter the seminal drop. Very interesting terminology. Does this mean that the neshama enters the body at the time of conception? I just mentioned to you before that it only comes in, according to some opinions, at 40 days after conception. So again, this is something we're going to have to analyze. Again, I'm no expert in any of this. I'm just reading these sources, these texts, and we'll have to discuss and analyze it. And if I don't have an answer, I could ask perhaps a rabbi who's better versed in Jewish literature in these matters than I am. And it says here, the neshama enters, it integrates with the body. So it's interesting, I recall reading as I was preparing for my son's bar mitzvah, that there are various stages, actually, of the soul entering the body. So perhaps the very first stage is conception. Okay, the text I told you earlier, that it's at 40 days. So I'm not sure if it's one or the other, or maybe just the seminal drop then. But it starts during the months of gestation. Again, this is conjecture. This is me just hacking a chinek, as they say. Okay, I'm just analyzing it as I say this, as I tell it to you, based on various texts I've read. So, is it first at conception, some degree, but maybe it's not fully, integrated, and then it starts to fully integrate during the 9 months of gestation, which is why, by the way, even an aborted child or a miscarriage is still treated with certain degrees of respect. I don't know at which stage of of abortion, or, okay, now abortion, I'm not in any way endorsing or saying that it's halachically allowed, but if it's done, what is done with that fetus? Or a woman who has a miscarriage, what is done with that fetus? And certainly a stillbirth is buried just as a fully, formulated child. I know this is very morbid. We'll have to, if anyone has a good joke to lighten the situation, because I can't stand when we get so, right? Okay, then there's, of course, at birth is a greater stage of integration, and then a bris milah, circumcision for male children, and the naming of the child for a female, because then the child has an identity. And then there is the bar and bat mitzvah, which is why I was reading about it in preparation for my son's bar mitzvah. There's more ideas that come to mind as I'm reading this text to you, because if the soul is deposited in the male seed drop, meaning when the father, who is the contributor of that semen, into the mother, who is the recipient of it, which is why in Kabbalah a male is called a mashpia, a giver, and a female is called a mekabel, a recipient, because of this concept. That doesn't mean that women don't have what to contribute. Of course, who's the one carrying this fetus all the way through 9 months of gestation? In fact, the mother has a much deeper connection with the child in that sense, because the mother is the one who has done everything, not only in pregnancy, even post-pregnancy. Yesterday was Mother's Day. And on Mother's Day, we celebrate how much mothers give to their children. As much as fathers raise their children, I think it's in a more aloof and separate way. I hope I don't get into trouble with what I'm saying. But I believe that mothers have a much deeper bond and connection to their children than fathers do. Which is interesting, because in the Torah portion that we read this past Shabbos, the portion of Kedoshim, it mentions parents twice. One at the very beginning of the parsha, it said, Ish es imay va'aviv tiro, a person should fear the mother and father, which is interesting, because in the Ten Commandments that you have right over there, it says, honor your father and mother. Rashi, the foremost commentator in Torah, right away asks the question, why, when it comes to respect, does it say your father first? And when it comes to fear, to revere, does it say the mother first? Rashi says, because naturally, children tend to respect their mothers more than they do their fathers, because of that intricate bond and connection that children have with their mother more so than with their fathers. Fathers tend to be that much more aloof, or, to some degree. Again, that's a generalization, I know, but I don't know. Would you, as experienced parents, concur with that sentiment? And therefore, Rashi says, the Torah says, respect your father, and then it says respect your mother, because it's telling you the one that a child's less inclined to necessarily do. Whereas it comes to fear, fathers tend to be more disciplinary, maybe a little bit more frightening than mothers. So therefore the Torah precedes it and says, you should fear your mother and your father, in that order. That's Rashi's commentary. I'm sure there's other commentaries that give other explanations and reasons, and I'm open to hear your interpretation of that as well. But that's one part. And the other part of the Torah, it says, do not curse your parents. So parents, certainly, it's very interesting how Mother's Day is connected to the Torah portion that we read in the day preceding it. Of course, in Judaism, Mother's Day and Father's Day should be every single day, not just reserved for one day of the year. But it's nice to have a holiday where children will spoil their mothers, and certainly should show that reverence and care and love and dedication, because mothers certainly deserve it. What's interesting, the Torah does not say, there's this idea of mother love and smother love. The Torah does not say love your mother. It doesn't say love your mother and father. It says honor your mother, your father and mother, and it says fear, revere your mother and father. Which love, perhaps in a world, in social media, there's this idea called like. I saw somebody wearing a t-shirt the other day, and on it said, with all the likes we have, we need some more love. There's a difference between liking and loving. And I don't know if this is the time to delve too deeply into liking and loving, but it's appropriate to touch on this a little bit, because we're in the period now between Pesach and Shavuos, and we know it's a period of semi-mourning. In fact, no weddings are conducted between last week, Rosh Chodesh Iyar, until the end of next week, which is Lag BaOmer, according to the most lenient of opinions. The most stringent opinion will have no weddings conducted from Pesach all the way till Shavuos. And then there's varying degrees of observance of this in between. We also don't take haircuts during this period between Pesach and Shavuos, and we don't listen to live performances of music. There are various rules of this period between Pesach and Shavuos, and again, different degrees of observance of this. But for what reason is there this semi-mourning? Even according to the most lenient opinion that it started last week and ends next week. It's because the Gemara tells us that 24,000 students of Rabbi Akiva, the great teacher of the Jewish people, lived in the times of the Second Temple, witnessed and experienced its destruction. He had 24,000 students. I mean, Rabbi Akiva himself is a fascinating character to me. Sorry for my deviation and digression. Bring me back to Mother's Day in a moment. Rabbi Akiva was born to parents who converted to Judaism, and he was not very, maybe they didn't know how to teach him that well, or for whatever reason, until age 40. So there's still hope. He did not know how to read Hebrew. He was considered an ignoramus. He was ignorant. He was illiterate. He didn't read Hebrew. He didn't know Jewish studies, but he had a wonderful wife. He married Rachel. And her father took her out of his will, because he said, "You're marrying this ignorant, illiterate person who's a simple, what was he, a farmer? He was a shepherd. I don't want you." You know, they were a very prestigious, wealthy family, Rachel. And he said, "If you marry him, that's it, out of my will." Only years later, when he saw what a great scholar Rabbi Akiva turned to be, did he re-invite Rachel into his will, into his family trust. What's the right word for it? What's it called in today's language? Come on, inheritance. There's a much more elegant term, the estate, right? And she believed in him. And one day when he observed water that would, he was just a shepherd, but he saw this water dripping on the rock every day. And drip by drip, it penetrated a hole into the rock. And he thought to himself, even if I'm rock-headed and nothing can enter me, but just like the water penetrates a hole into this rock, Torah, which is compared to water as God's wisdom, it descends from above. Divine wisdom also, it's like water which nourishes a thirsting, arid body, so too the divine wisdom of Torah will nurture an arid, thirsting soul. And therefore he applied himself to it, and with her encouragement, he started from zero to hero and became the great, great scholar and sage Rabbi Akiva. And he amassed thousands of students, and until 2 years ago, I didn't understand how it was possible that 24,000 students could die in an epidemic, but I think we understand what pandemics could do today. According to the World Health Organization, the number of deaths from COVID is exceeding 15 million already. What did you want to say, Rosalind? Absolutely, 100%. So yes, a dedication to Mother's Day today. And as the story indicates, he became a great scholar and teacher. But the Gemara says, during this period, 24,000 of his students died. I think there were only 5 survivors, something like that. I'll have to find the Gemara itself to read it to you, to tell you the exact story. And those 5 students, he rebuilt his teachings, and they continued his legacy. But seeing from how from COVID it's possible for an epidemic to kill so many people, as we've seen here in South Africa, over 100,000 deaths. Is it 100,000 in South Africa alone? And they say that number is far higher than projected, than recorded. It's a lot more than 100,000 people dead already from COVID here. And don't forget, it's not only those who die from COVID, from the plague itself, but it's got a much wider effect. How many suicides and depressions and other effects of COVID as well. But when something like this happens, we ask ourselves, what is COVID to tell us, to teach us? Is COVID just an epidemic? Or rather, it's a pandemic, it's global. And we don't know in the times of Rabbi Akiva if it was a pandemic Now, there's a lot of people who took lessons out of COVID, and it's a nice thing to do. We don't have prophets today to guarantee the reason. To me, I saw it as God giving us a wake-up call that we've somehow, to some degree, neglected and forgotten that God's in control of the world. And God says, I'm going to send this little invisible, microscopic little disease to show you that I'm still here and I'm still around and I'm still in charge. Perhaps. But again, I'm no authority. I'm no prophet. And my perspective is not necessarily, I think it's a simple idea and makes sense, no? The Gemara says when something affects you, when something happens to you, you should do a little bit of soul searching. Okay? It's not for me to point fingers at you when, God forbid, something untoward is happening in your life. I should only have pity and compassion and care and concern and love and encouragement and support. That's what I should have. But when something happens to me, God forbid, that's no good, or when blessings come my way, say, what good deed did I do to deserve this, to be meritorious to this privilege and blessing in my life? And likewise, when something untoward, God forbid, happens, I have to do a little bit of soul searching and some deep introspection. Why did this happen to me? And so the Talmud says, Rabbi Akiva, who lived by a teaching of this week's Torah portion that we read on Shabbos this past week, the portion said, to love your fellow as yourself. There are many great sages who said, what's their favorite verse of the Torah? Right? One sage said, Bereshit bara Elokim es hashamayim v'saaretz, in the beginning God created heaven and earth. That's his favorite verse because it describes that everything is in the hands of God. And another one says, no, but B'Tselem Elokim baroto. In the end of the first chapter where we describe the creation of man, right? What does it say? God created man in his image. Another great scholar said, that's his favorite verse. And in fact, a few weeks ago, we read the verse of the sacrifices where it says, Ben Pazi says that's his favorite verse about the consistency, the commitment that man has to have in our dedication to God. Rabbi Akiva, his favorite verse was this one, love your fellow as yourself. And he said, Zeh klal gadol b'Torah, this is the most important fundamental principle of the entire Torah. Ironically, the Talmud says, you know why Rabbi Akiva's students all died during this period? Because they did not treat each other with respect. The verse says, because they did not accord respect to one another. So the question, of course, is, if you're a student of Rabbi Akiva, then no doubt you live by his teachings. You should epitomize, you should be the role models of what your teacher taught. So how is it possible that Rabbi Akiva's own students did not love each other? The Talmud doesn't say they didn't love each other, actually. It says they didn't respect each other. And from this, our sages tell us there's a big difference between respecting and loving. Think in your life, are there people who perhaps you love but you don't respect? I find that happens most with family. Because when a stranger acts in a peculiar way, it doesn't bother us. A stranger is a weirdo. It doesn't bother me. But when my own relative is acting in a strange way, ooh, I can't stand it. It irks at me. Why? Because it's my relative. Now the question only is, the Kutzke Rebbe had an expression. He said, if I am I because you are you are you because I am I, then I am not I and you are not you. But if you are you because you are you, and I am I because I am I, then I could be I and you could be you, and now we could all live and get along. What on earth did he say? Let's repeat it again. If I am I because you are you. Meaning, I'm just trying to impress you. You know, when a guy's opening the door of the car for a lady, you know, either the lady's new or the car is new. Right? If I'm just living my life to impress others, what they say is, don't live somebody else's life. Just live your own because everyone else is taken. Just be you. You're indispensable to God's plan. And only you could be you, nobody else could be you. If we're constantly living our life trying to be somebody else, we're not living ourselves. We're not being true to ourselves. That's why the Kutzke says, only if I am I because I am I. Not because you are you, not because I'm trying to impress you and you know, be whatever it is because I'm living true to myself, to my beliefs, to my feelings, to my convictions. Then you could be you could be free to be yourself as well. Now the thing is in life, at the end of the day, perhaps that's the problem, is that we want others, we feel like, you know, I remember hearing somebody comment and say, why is it that do you ever say, why don't they look like me? Right? Do you ever get upset at somebody else for not looking like you? Right? You say, why don't you look exactly like me? So why does everybody have to think exactly like you? It's my way or the highway. That if the person doesn't think like you, that's it. And this is what the Talmud discusses about the problem with the students of Rabbi Akiva. Is that maybe they loved each other so much, they felt, you're wrong for not thinking my way, for not seeing the Torah, my perspective of the Torah, my religious convictions and beliefs. Can you not leave room for somebody else to tolerate another person's way of seeing things? Maybe there's other perspectives as well in life. Do you agree with me? So bracha, to answer your question about a video you sent me last week. You sent me a video last week. I don't agree with one thing that guy said in that video. But he's entitled to his opinion at the end of the day. And I think in general, if you read the Torah portion last week, we read a fascinating verse that said there that you should not hate your brother in your heart. You should surely rebuke your friend and do not place a sin upon him. What's interesting is when we dissect that verse, it starts off in a very positive way. Don't hate, right? It's a very nice, don't hate your brother in your heart. When you want to reprimand somebody, which in general, if you've taken a Dale Carnegie course, which I have, then you remember Dale Carnegie has 3 C's that you shouldn't be doing. Don't condemn, criticize, or complain. Sometimes in life you have to, especially if it's your own child, and it's your job and responsibility to teach them and to set them right. Or if perhaps your spouse or somebody or a coworker or somebody else is doing things that perhaps irritate you and get on your nerves and gets under your skin, so you have to tell them. So the Torah is telling you how to tell them. How do you tell them? First of all, don't do it with animosity, with hatred. If you're begrudging them, if you're feeling animosity in your heart, that's not the time to tell them. Then when you're ready to tell them, the Torah says, rebuke, you shall surely rebuke. It's a mitzvah to tell somebody when they're doing something wrong. But how? Et amitecha, like a friend. Not only that, the word et means to include yourself, our sages tell us. Realize I'm also not perfect. I also have shortcomings and flaws. I'm human. And perhaps when you tell it to somebody in that way and say, I'm also far from perfect. But Dale Carnegie says, deletes everything you said before. Totally negates. Right? If you tell somebody you're such a wonderful person, but, okay, that means I'm not a man. With all due respect, right? When they say with all due respect, it means, okay, there's no respect here. So you have to learn, we have to know how to tell a person. And then finally, he says, that they do not place the sin upon him. Don't say he or she, that individual, is bad, that he's sinful. Don't put the sin on them. Elevate them. My father, when I was a child, my father, whenever he wanted to tell me off, I knew when he would go like this, as pastnish. Do you know what as pastnish means? I'm becoming of you and your characteristic, your behavior. This, I expect better from you. So you elevate the person. Don't put the sin on him. It's the behavior that's wrong, not the individual that's wrong. So it's important lessons that we have to realize. And I believe that mothers have that innate ability to raise children better than fathers do in that sense. They know how to tell it to the child in that sense. Just the way, they say, love conquers all. No, it's not necessarily. The Torah doesn't say, it says love your fellow as yourself. What you don't want done to you, to others do not do. And this is something that Rabbi Akiva said is the most important principle of the whole Torah. Yet his own students were deficient in this. They lacked in it because they felt that every person has to see things their way. And that is not the way. We have to leave room to tolerate other people's perspectives and opinions as well. So yes, there are people perhaps we love but don't respect. And then there are people perhaps we respect but we don't love. Now, don't you have a professor perhaps? You respect their teachings. You respect their philosophy. You don't love them. They're not your family. Okay, then of course there are people we don't love and we don't respect, and that's a whole different story. Ideally, we should learn to love and respect, especially when it comes to family. But there's a difference between loving and liking, and we have to understand the difference between the two. And we have to learn how to synthesize the two, and that takes some work. And I believe a mother naturally loves their children likes their children, respects them, and raises them with the morals, the ethics, the values that the children need. And where do we see this? In the very first matriarch of the Jewish people, mother of all the Jewish people. Who was that? Sarah Imenu. The Talmud tells us 3 blessings that Sarah had. Anyone know what they were? First one is her candles. She would light her candles on Friday and would last all the way, miraculously, until the next Friday. And this, our sages tell us, ceased when she passed away, and only resumed and continued when Yitzchak brought Rebecca, into his tent. So that's one blessing. The second blessing was her dough, the challah. That also had a blessing in it, and returned when Isaac married Rebecca. And the third one was the cloud of glory that hovered above her tent, which also returned with Rivka's coming into Yitzchak's tent. And this, our sages tell us, is 3 mitzvahs of Jewish women: lighting Shabbos candles, baking challah, and the education of the children. Where do we see this in the 3? The candles they symbolize the warmth that a mother instills in her children. That's the light of the candles that a mother gives, that the warmth that a mother envelops the children with. Number 2 is the challah, the dough that symbolizes the nurture with which a mother gives her children, that they learn contentment and satisfaction because of that loving nurture that the dough represents. And the third one is the cloud of glory. That's the recognition of Hashem's presence in our life, the education that a mother gives her children. And now it's true that fathers also give, but this is unique to mothers, these 3. This is something the Talmud teaches us. So as we come from Mother's Day, there's a lot for us to reflect upon and to celebrate. Now back to what my question was. I'm still in the middle of this text here. I still haven't finished. This is the problem with me, my friends. I digress, I deviate. Okay, now, the question I had was, if the soul is deposited in this male drop, which is what the father contributes. Remember that it's a 3-way partnership in the creation of a human being. Mother, father, God. Don't forget God's presence, okay? And we know how many parents try to bear children, and fertility is a blessing from God. And for whatever reason, it doesn't work. In fact, I saw the last week there's a rabbi and rebbitzin in this community who have a child in California. For many years, they didn't have children. They're both in their 40s now, and they were blessed with a child, their very first child. After adopting a few children, they were blessed with their first child last week. It's a big simcha, tremendous celebration. Yet, who is the determining factor of a child's Jewish identity? Who does it come from? Mother. The mother is the determining factor of a child's Jewish identity. Now, in other religions, it goes by the father. All right, so it's very interesting how this all works, but we'll get back to that. Perhaps we could explore these along the way. Now, it's logical to assume that the angel in charge of pregnancy, as this medrash here is telling us, is well aware of whose seed is in his control, right? And which uterus it's going to be developed. It's fascinating. If you recall, we did a course here a while ago, a medical ethics course, and that the Talmud talks about a uterus transplant. I don't know if that exists yet today in modern medicine. Anyone here know? But the Talmud talks about the theory of a uterus transplant centuries ago, millennia ago. It's fascinating. But just think how much more so is God well aware. It is Hashem who summons the soul. And if, according to this midrashic statement that we're reading here, that God's will is that this child will be born and possess a Jewish status, then God summons a Jewish soul to enter that drop. And yes, of course, Gentiles also have souls, but this is again getting more mystical. the difference between a Jewish soul versus a non-Jewish soul. And indeed, the Talmud quotes the verse in the Torah. It says, Goy Gerishin is Gair. It says, convert who converts. If that's the case, which means, the Talmud says, a convert who converts, means to say that the convert always had a Jewish soul, even though the convert was born to a non-Jewish mother. Otherwise, the Talmud tells us, the language would be used, Goy shenis gayer, a Gentile who converts. But that's not what it says. It says in the verse, Ger shenis gayer, a convert who converts. Says the Talmud, this indicates that the convert always had a Jewish soul in them. They were predestined to convert, and this was part of their journey to be born to a non-Jewish mother. But the language the Torah employs, very interestingly, is not a Gentile who converts to Judaism, but rather a convert who converts to Judaism, which the Talmud uses as proof to say that this convert always was destined to convert. So let me just conclude reading this statement, and then we have to read one more statement, and with this we'll conclude for today. Says the Medrash, the soul protests. You watched that video before? Come with me, little neshamala. The soul doesn't really want to come to this world. As the Medrash puts it, the soul says, Master of the universe, I'm quite satisfied with the world that I inhabit since the day you created me. The soul is already in the heavenly abode. The soul is up in the celestial heavenly realm. The soul's comfortable there. Imagine you're on holiday and now you have to come back to Joburg. And it's cold and it's miserable. I mean, the truth is, it's thank God a nice, beautiful day. But were you out yesterday? It was rainy. It was cold. Imagine, let's take a simple example. In the morning, when your alarm clock starts ringing, and you go, I don't want to get out of bed. It's so much more comfortable under my cover. Right? Says the Medrash that the soul demonstrates and toys before God and says, here I'm holy and pure. I'm basking in the spiritual realm of your glory. Why do you want me to come into this putrid drop, go into a physical world? Nech, I don't want that experience. Could you relate to it? We like our comfort zones, don't we? That's why when the doctor says you have to change your diet, you go, I don't want to diet. I don't want to change. It's not easy. Exercise. No, I don't like to change. So the soul, says the Medrash, is very comfortable where it's at in the heavenly realm and does not want to come here into this world. Hence the video you saw before. That's why I started with that video. Okay, I want to read one more text before we go and enjoy some nice lunch. Okay, are you prepared? And maybe we'll discuss it more tomorrow. I'm going to read you a Mishnah from Pirkei Avot, Ethics of Our Fathers, which we read these days now between Pesach and Shavuos every Shabbos afternoon. If you're not reading it, at least you get a taste of it right now. So this is chapter 4, verse Mishnah 16. Says the Mishnah, Olam Hazeh, this world, Doima leprozdar, is compared to a corridor bifnei ha'olam haba, before the world to come. Based on that meaning, what is that? What is the meaning of that? Actually, let me finish the Mishnah and then we'll analyze it. Haskin atzmecha beprozdar. The Mishnah says, prepare yourself in the corridor, kidei shetikanis letraklin, so you can enter the palace. Based on this teaching, which is more important and significant? This world or the next world? You want me to repeat the Mishnah so you could analyze it again? Again, this world is like a corridor to the next world. Prepare yourself in the corridor so that you may enter the palace. So which one's the palace? Which one's the corridor? This is the corridor. The next world is the palace. So which one is more essential, this world or the next? Which one? No, based on this Mishnah. Hold on. Not based on our understanding and interpretations. We'll get back to that. Based on the simple meaning of this Mishnah. What's more important, the corridor or the palace? The palace. Yeah? So which one from this Mishnah seems to be more important? This world or the next? The next. Now I'm gonna go to the next Mishnah. That was Mishnah 16. Now we read Mishnah 17. It says, Yafa sha'a achat shakaras ruach ba'elam haba mikol chay alam hazeh. A single moment of bliss in the world to come is greater than all of this world. I'm not done yet. We're going to have to still analyze. But based on these two teachings. Number one, the Medrash that says the soul doesn't want to come into this world. Why? Because it's comfortable basking in the heavenly spiritual abode. And the next Mishnah that says this world is just the corridor to the next world, which is the grand palace. And one moment of bliss in the world to come is far greater than this entire world. Based on that, what would you believe? What are we doing here? Let's rush to die because the next world is so much better, no? Who needs this world? If I really am interested to follow the teaching of this Mishnah and this Medrash, then not only is the soul not interested in this physical world, in heaven, think about it, the soul doesn't want to come here according to what the Medrash is saying. The soul doesn't want to go and be invested in a body and all the problems and sorrows we get in this world. The next world is far better. So what on earth are we doing here? Yeah? You have to work to get to the next. You know, there's a bracha, a blessing we recite every morning. In fact, we say it every time we go out of the bathroom. You familiar with this bracha? Asher Yatzar? It's a beautiful bracha. Maybe I should take a sitter and just read the words to you. But we praise God for creating the very complex human body with God's incredible wisdom. And in this bracha, we thank God for designing the extraordinary system of our human plumbing, call it, okay? The excretory system. Okay, you think about how the system works. It removes all the excess unnecessary materials, the toxicity from our bodies. And if not for that, would we be able to live? Imagine how much we would accumulate. Imagine how big we would be. Imagine how unhealthy. So this is a blessing from God. The whole entire metabolic function and system that our kidneys work and the whole metabolism and the whole process. And what do we conclude this bracha with? Baruch atah Hashem raifei chal basar umafli la'asas. We say thank you Hashem, blessed are you God, who heals all flesh and performs wonders. What are we referring to when we say that God performs wonders? Simply, of course, it means the wonder that is the whole intricate human body, that this whole system, the way it works. But there's another layer of understanding, that God performs wonders and that He sustains the human soul in a body and binds a spiritual entity with a physical one, that it all comes together as one. So with that in mind, we realize that the physical and the spiritual, the body and the soul, are separate entities from each other. And so the same holds true with death. When that time arrives, the soul does not live out the rest of its eternal life in a useless fashion. Rather, the soul resumes its previous tranquil and idyllic spiritual state in an existence that is far superior to the one of this world, and it's promoted from the corridor to the palace. Okay, so in other words, the journey into this physical world seems to be somewhat of a downgrade for the soul, but don't jump anywhere yet. Okay, we'll have to discuss this a little bit further, and please come back tomorrow for more discussion, where we'll talk a little bit more about the soul's journey in this world, what we're here for, and not only is the soul not a physical being, as we discussed, but as it seems from this Mishnah and from this Medrash that we discussed today, it's not particularly interested in the physical world as we discussed. The soul didn't want to come into this world, and the soul seems to be yearning. In fact, the soul is compared to a candle. The candle's constantly flickering upward, and the soul is also yearning to return to that place. But we have a purpose, a mission in this journey. Yes, Cynthia? Oh, it's a good question. And in fact, the Mishnah says no. The Mishnah says that the soul does not have a choice. As much as the soul kicks and screams before God and says, I don't want to go into this physical world. I don't want the struggles and obstacles and challenges of a journey in a physical body. No. The Mishnah says, Al korchach atachai. It's not by your choice that you are born. The Al korchach atames. And it's also not by your choice that you die, which is one of the reasons why Jewish law frowns upon suicide, because it's not supposed to come by our choice. We're terminating our mission in this world before the time that it's meant to be concluded, and therefore Jewish law forbids suicide. Now, I'm not going to in any way condemn, God forbid, anyone we know. Unfortunately, I knew too many people have taken their lives, and Jewish law today would say that for the most part it had to do more with their mental state, or they just couldn't handle and tolerate the burdens and challenges and struggles that they're in, and therefore we usually attribute it to a psychological state of being rather than a decision to go against the Torah. Jewish law forbids suicide, certainly homicide, for those reasons. But we'll discuss more of that with time.
Doesn't it say that there's going to be a particular amount of witnesses if somebody commits suicide?
Yes, certainly. There's a lot to be discussed about that. We'll touch on it another time. Okay, ladies and gents, I hope you all enjoyed today's shiur. Please enjoy lunch, and see you all tomorrow, same time, same place, 10 a.m. right here at Chabad House. If you got any questions,